So this is, I think, the most northerly talk on beavers that I think has ever taken place in Scotland. So I'll double check with the Beaver Trust, but I'm not aware of anywhere else further north than this that's had a beaver talk. So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to come along, and I know it's being recorded, so for those that can't make it today, hopefully you enjoy the recording. So I do work for the Cairngorms National Park Authority. I'm not doing it in Cairngorms National Park Authority time, but I have spoken to the Chief Executive and it's okay. But all of the talk is all branded, and I thought, well, I might as well wear my branded polo shirt as well. So everything that I say about the Cairngorms is on brand, but I might say a few things about maybe West Coast and North West Coast beavers that have got nothing to do with the National Park Authority and are purely my personal opinions. So let's put that caveat in. It's fine, I'm not saying anything controversial. So how did I get involved in this? Well, I applied and I wore my lucky beaver hat, which you will see on the third last slide. You'll see my lucky red baseball cap, which is a Parks Canada cap. And about 15 seconds before I was having the online interview, I thought I'd had about 3 job interviews, 2022, 2022, and I'd been second in every single one of them. I was getting really dispirited, and I thought, well, death or glory, I'm going to wear my hat. And so I got interviewed by 3 people, one of whom is now my boss, the other one is now my boss's boss, and then there's the head of HR. And so, of course, the screen pops up, you get introduced, and they say, well, hello, Jonathan. And I could see 3 faces there, and I could see 2 faces going, what on earth is he wearing on his head? Is it a Make America Great Again baseball cap? And it wasn't, but thankfully Sally, who's now my boss, she saw it and she got it, and it was like, so it's like kind of knife-edge stuff. But the Beaver Project is not really about beavers, it's about people. And one of the things, I mean, I've been involved in nature conservation for over 30 years now, and there's a lot of things that I've got out of this job that have been kind of real, kind of like, not quite a Damascene conversion, but real kind of, epiphanies. And one of the biggest epiphanies is nature conservation is all about people. It's not actually about species, it's about relationships with people, it's about encouraging places to be managed differently, encouraging people to accept different maybe types of wildlife coming in, or accept wildlife that's already there. And I would say probably this job is maybe 95+% people, and maybe 4 to 5% beavers, and most of that's feeding them carrots when we release them. And then beavers just kind of do it. They're kind of very relatively straightforward. If you put them in a nice place, they tend to stick around, especially if you feed them carrots. And we've been very successful in the breeding that we've had as well, so we'll talk a bit about that. So I came into post 3 years ago on the 15th of March, so the project itself is just over really kind of 3 years old. There's been a Cairngorm Beaver group since 2017, and in the middle of 2022 there was a paper that went to the Park Authority Board to put forward the proposal that the Park Authority should be the lead in any proposed reintroduction that took place at beavers. And the reason that could happen was because of the Butte House agreement between the Scottish National Party and the Greens, and Lorna Slater in particular was very keen on beavers and wanted beavers to be legally translocated outwith of their existing range. So before the Butte House agreement, you couldn't move beavers outwith of how far they'd spread naturally. So we couldn't legally move them into the Cairngorms National Park because the nearest beavers are sort of in northern Perthshire. But with the Butte House agreement, there was a change in government policy, and all of a sudden that unlocked the door that allowed us to go and legally translocate to different places. So we've had translocations to the Cairngorms National Park, the Spey catchment, we've had translocations to Glen Affric, that's taken place over the last sort of like autumn and winter this year, and there will be further translocations going ahead. So there's going to be a licence application for the Nest catchment going in, which is obviously quite substantial. So there's lots of things starting to happen because of this, but it took a change in legislation. And if you look at all the timeline of beavers in Scotland, or talking about beavers coming to Scotland, it's all to do with little things that have changed, little political things. So for example, When the SNP first got in, Labour, who were the previous government before 2007, were saying no to any beaver trial. SNP got in, they said yes to the trial. Then when we got the Butte House Agreement, so the Greens came in, all of a sudden we could start to translocate beavers beyond their existing range. So there's been like really kind of tiny little points, and if those hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't be here speaking about translocating beavers into the Cairngorms National Park. So there's been a few kind of key points along the way that there's been a great deal of good fortune that's happened and everything's lined up that's allowed beavers to be translocated. In terms of beavers in Scotland, we've got beavers in Knapdale, so the trial took place in 2008 to 2013, so the Scottish Beaver Trial, and in 2015 they pulled together all of the research that had taken place there because we had to find out how beavers would behave in Scotland, how it would be different from continental Europe, and what the report said was they behave exactly the same. But we had to go through the process, you just have to go through the process to go and prove the point. So there was this kind of, British exceptionalism about nature conservation in some respects. And beavers just do what beavers do, and that's what they did. And at the same time, well, before the Scottish Beaver Trial in 2000, there was the first photograph record of a beaver in the wild, and that seemed to be from a wildlife park in Comrie in central Perthshire that had poor fencing, and beavers kept escaping, and in those days it was easier to get other beavers, so you just kept bringing beavers in and beavers just escaped. And there was potentially some augmentation of that very low density wild population from certain individuals who will remain nameless. Paul Ramsey, there we go. Don't minute that. So beavers started living in the wild in Scotland in about 2000, but they only became official, so they were only kind of acknowledged in 2005 when there was a police investigation of beavers potentially escaping from a wild collection, and then the person involved in that was actually was arrested, and then was asked. Then he asked the police once. Well, I'm not sure if he was arrested. I think he was. He was asked. So he asked the police, saying, "Can you prove that that beaver is one of mine?" And the police had to say no, and so that meant he couldn't be arrested because the beaver was in the wild. And how do you know which one is which? And in those days they weren't pit tagged, so you couldn't identify individual beavers. So there's a wild population of beavers, the so-called legal beavers, and they've now spread very widely, and they've got a population of probably over about 3,000 individuals now. And the population that's in Knapdale is still very, very small. I think it's less than 50 individuals because they were deliberately released into a dead end. So there's no beavers round about, so their population is actually declining. And in a slight irony, they actually took some beavers from Tayside and took them to Knapdale to augment the population to stop it dying out. There's a bit of irony there. So eventually the Tayside population is now near Cairngorms, it's west of Cairngorms. Eventually it will get to Loch Hall, and eventually you'll get the two populations will mix together, and that will allow the population to sustain itself and start to spread. But the point of the beaver trial was to contain beavers. They didn't want the beavers to go and spread, so naturally beavers wouldn't be found in a kind of an ecological dead end. They would be found in a new river catchment and they'd be spreading through it. And we'll talk more about that a little bit further on in the talk. So this is the rear end of a beaver. So it's pretty big. It's the second largest rodent in the world. They can weigh over 30 kilograms, over 60 pounds, so fairly decent sized dog. They're about 1.2 metres long, so that's nearly 4 feet. So pretty substantial, about a foot or 30 centimetres of that is the bald tail, which is again quite unusual. They've got the digestive system of a rodent, so like a rabbit or a hare, so they've got a big cecum, but they don't have any kind of complex ruminant stomachs, so they're bulk feeders, and that's one of the reasons that they're pretty chunky. Now, I wasn't a beaver expert to start in this job, but it was more the kind of, I think, the people skills and the general wildlife knowledge that I had that allowed me to be successful at getting the job. But as I said, my mind has been blown quite a few times by beavers, and this is one of them, is that this is how widespread Eurasian beaver used to be, and there's certainly no reason why it couldn't have been the catchments in northern China, in South Korea, North Korea, in Hokkaido, and all the way to the Kamchatka Peninsula and over to the Bering Strait. Incredibly widespread. And then when you get to about 1900, there was 7 populations here, and there was 1 population there. And all of the rest of them had been completely exterminated. And all for the fur trade. Predominantly in Russia and China, there was a huge demand for these furs. Particularly Shanghai was a huge, huge fur market. And basically a fur desert was created by just exterminating all of these beavers. So Norway had beavers in 1900, France had beavers, Germany had beavers, Belarusia, Poland, and a little bit of Russia as well. Those were the 7 extant populations, and they reckon that round about 1,000 individuals in total in those 7 populations, and then a very, very small population in Mongolia. Question marks over Ireland, question marks over the very southwestern part of Iberia, Italy, maybe it's too dry, and Greece as well. But one of the things about beavers is they modify the habitats. And when beavers disappear, those habitats tend to get an awful lot drier because beavers make habitats wetter through damming or, well, usually through damming, that's how they make it. So they create novel, brand new wetland habitats and they hold water. So if you can think of, most of you will remember kind of like John Wayne movies or Wild West movies, the red deserts and those really kind of like dry riverbeds. Well, most of them, well, all of them, would have had beavers in them at one point, and they wouldn't have been so incised, and they would have been a green tongue basically going through a very, very dry landscape. So these really deep arrows, as they call them, get eroded when beavers disappear. And what beavers do when they move back in is they start to build up the layers of sediment, and then the groundwater comes up to the level of the land, and you start to get these green fringes starting to come into being. But when you take the beavers away, then basically the land really starts to dries out.
Just focus that a bit better on.
Oh, there you go.
Is that better?
Yep, it's good. Interestingly, so the Levant coastal strip, again there's question marks about where beavers there. Well, certainly Aspen used to be there. It's got a lot drier over the last 2,000 years because it is said that Jesus was nailed to a cross that was made out of aspen. And interestingly down here, this is obviously quite a contentious area at the moment, the Gulf of Arabia, but down to the Iraq marshes there was beavers there until the 1860s. Which is incredibly far south, but the Iraq marshes, the Tigris and Euphrates, massive, massive wetlands that unfortunately don't really exist anymore. But just an incredibly widespread species. It basically stops when it gets too warm because of that fur coat, and also if there's any predators off them, that stops them going further south. And then to the north, this line is actually moving north because the tree line's moving further north. So the tree line is the determining factor for can a beaver survive in the winter or not, unless there's a field of carrots or potatoes there. So in the very, very northern part of their range, they must have either willow scrub or some kind of tree to go and sustain themselves over the winter because they eat the bark. So there's quite a movement of beavers into the Arctic now as the tree line's really advancing forward very quickly. Question mark over Ireland, were beavers ever there? Did St. Patrick cast them out? Who knows? But when the sea levels were a lot lower, they were about 120 metres lower about 5,000 years ago, there's no reason a beaver couldn't have got across. And there will be, eventually, someone will find some sort of subfossil evidence of beaver bones in Ireland, so I'm pretty sure they were there as well. I was just amazed to find out just how widespread beavers were. And in North America, they got a close cousin. So they separated as species 7.5 million years ago, and then they convergently evolved to look pretty much exactly the same and do exactly the same things. But they can't interbreed because the Eurasian beavers got 48 chromosomes and the North American beavers got 40. And they only discovered this in 1973. Some Russian scientists did some research on it, looked at the chromosomes, and then finally said, that's why they can't interbreed. There are some North American beavers that are in Finland. They were sent back by emigrant Finns who'd gone to North America in the 1800s, and you also get white-tailed deer in Finland as well because they were sent back as well. And so there was no beavers at all in Finland, but again, they have been reintroduced. And I think Sweden was the first place to reintroduce beavers. I think it was 1922. and there's been, I think, over 60 reintroductions of beavers in Western Europe, and there's a population now of well over 1 million, but no one really knows how big the population was before they were being exploited by hunting. Here's a question for you. Why did they almost go extinct due to hunting? So this is the first letter of the reason. The first one's pretty straightforward. No. So what product might you want out of a beaver? No. No. Think about what would you want. You're killing an animal. Meat. Yes. Okay. The second one is what you were saying. So it's a particular word relating to the type of musk that you get from a beaver.
Castorium.
Castorium. Yeah. So which is I think it's Greek for beaver is castor. So castor fibre. And then the F. Another kind of basic product we'd get from an animal. Fur, yep. And then this is a tricky one. FFHF. So it is fur. Little word beginning with F. For. Think of Lewis. Your clothes, hats. But so what's the other F then? Think of Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland and the Tea Party, and someone who's a little bit not quite right in the head. Honestly, there's a point behind this. Played by Johnny Depp in the remake of it, if anybody knows. Mad Hatter, so fur hat felting. The reason that hatters went mad is they used mercury nitrate to felt the fur. And of course, mercury is not good for your brain, so that's why hatters were, they were basically brain damaged because of the chemicals they were using for the felting. Now, the reason that they used beaver fur to make hats was because it was the best fur in the world for felting. So most felted hats now tend to be rabbit fur, but beaver fur is absolutely the best because. And I've got a beaver coat here, which was given to me by Heather Bantic, so we reckon this is probably for about the 20s. You can come and have a feel of it. This is the under fur, so incredibly soft. But if you cut it all off and then you start to felt it together, it's actually got tiny barbs, so it felts incredibly well, and it makes a hat that would last longer than a lifetime. So. In the time of Robert Burns in the late 1700s, he's got a poem called Tip Up Your Hat, and hats were called beavers in those days. And if you got a beaver felt hat, it would last a lifetime. It was waterproof, it would hold its shape. Think of all of the European armies. Napoleon had a new beaver felt bicorn hat every month because he was the emperor. So how many beavers went into making those hats? So there was a massive demand for fur for European armies and also for fashion. Now, the epicenter of the hat-making industry used to be St. Petersburg in Russia, and then somehow in the 1500s, the technology, which was being top secret, somehow managed to migrate to London. And London became the epicenter of the hat-making industry, so there was a huge demand for fur. And then if you go to the end of the sort of the 17th century, so the late 1600s, in 1670, Charles II signed a royal warrant which created the Hudson Bay Company, which was basically to try and get as much animal fur out of what became Canada as possible. And so the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwestern Company, and one of the territories in Canada before it was Canada was called the Northwest Territories, and that was just an area of land that was given to the Northwest Company, and there was quite a few men from round about Ullapool that worked in that particular company, were quite high up in it, and so land was ceded. No one asked the local people, obviously, but they were seeded from abroad and said you could go and get as much fur as you can out of these areas, and that's what happened. And that really led to the creation of what Canada as we know it, and it was the beaver fur trade, because the beaver pelts were just incredibly valuable. And the Hudson Bay Company actually used beaver fur, so what was known as a round beaver, which was a beaver stretched over a hoop. So a beaver skin, stretched over a hoop. That was the form of currency. So they had tokens that was the equivalent of one beaver pelt. And of course they had the Hudson Bay shops. So if you got given your tokens, that's where you spent your money. So beaver fur was a huge thing in the creation of Canada. And it was actually going to be in the Canadian flag. So when they were discussing the Canadian flag, there were some people saying, oh, we want to go and have a beaver on our flag. And one politician said, there's no damn way we're going to be represented by a rodent. So they got the red maple leaf instead. They could have had a red beaver instead. So what is a beaver? So it is industrious, it's eager, it's busy. So there's lots of, well, there's some words that are related to beavers that are still extant in the English language. But the animal hasn't been here for probably the best part of 400, 500, 600 years maybe. So whether this is related to the North American beaver or just beavers have been just stuck in our language for a really long period of time, I think it's very difficult to answer. And it's also one of the reasons why they wanted to have the beavers representing Canada, because it's family orientated, it's a highly social rodent, which is unusual. It's also got a really good Protestant work ethic, which is they like, and it builds things. And honestly, that is they thought this represents a young nation. This is the sort of animal we want to represent ourselves. So it's a rodent. So from Latin roder to gnaw, it's got really, really big incisor teeth. It's got a massive root from its lower incisor that goes basically all the way to the sort of bend in the joint in the jaw. And the reason for that is, if you think with our teeth, if we were nibbling on wood, our teeth would get loose very, very quickly. And the lower incisor is the one that does all the cutting. And so it's really, really very firmly anchored within the jaw itself. So when a beaver is cutting a piece of wood, it anchors its top jaws and then it uses its lower jaws as the chisel. It doesn't go like that unless it's nibbling away just on the soft bits of bark. Or when it's going for the big chips of wood, it's going in that direction. So it needs those lower teeth to be really, really, really firm, and you don't want a wobbly tooth if you're a beaver. It's semi-aquatic, so it doesn't spend all its time in water, but it spends a lot of time in water. It's got ear flaps, it's got nasal flaps. It can only breathe through its nose, it can't breathe through its mouth, so it can't ingest water into its lungs. It can suck its cheeks behind its incisors and actually gnaw underwater without ingesting too much water. It's got a wonderful thick fur with a waterproofing that it comes out of its anal glands. So it preens like a bird, so it's constantly keeping its coat sort of all greasy, so it's really, really nice and waterproof. And it's got really, really big webbed feet, probably about 8 inches or 20 centimetres long. So it's got these little hands, which is why beavers are cute. So squirrels are cute, but they're not totally cute. They're a little bit cute because they've got hands, but they don't really have hands, they're more kind of like paw-like. But with a beaver, you can see it's got hands. So hands mean it's relatable, so that's why beavers are cute. If they had webbed front feet, we wouldn't think they were so cute. So it's really unusual that they've got such dexterous front paws. So they've actually got, they don't have an opposable thumb, but they've got an opposable pinky. So they can actually grip onto things. But because it is effectively a front leg, it's not an arm, they can't rotate. So if they're carrying anything, they can carry things like a forklift truck, but they can't go like that, like we can, because they've got a leg joint, not a wrist or an arm joint. But they are, because of those hands, it just means they're incredibly dexterous. They're also very good at digging, so they use them for digging as well. So they've got, kind of like front paws, hands that do all the kind of like the difficult work, and then the rear paws are just for swimming and for walking about. So they've got a division of labour. And so when they are swimming, they just tuck their paws up in front of them and use their tail and their back paws to go and swim about the place. They can also hold their breath for a really long period of time, so way longer than any other kind of non-marine mammal. So they can hold their breath for 15 minutes, and that's a predator avoidance. So if they get scared, they'll go slap their tail on the water. That's one of the reasons why it doesn't have hair on it, to make a loud noise to warn all the other beavers, and then they go and either sink to the bottom of the pond, or they go and swim all the way back to the lodge or the burrow that they live in. And so because they can hold their breath for such a long period of time, basically the predators just give up. This is a really, really important statistic, and this possibly got me the job. So I did lots and lots and lots of reading for the job interview, and one of the key statistics that came out was 90% of beavers' activity is within 20 metres of a water course, as long as there's enough food for them close to the water course. So all things being equal, if there's a nice broadleaf riparian woodland there, beavers will stay in that woodland because there's no need for them to go further afield. If there's no riparian woodland, but there's woodland that's 50 metres away, then the beavers will have to go to that woodland, so they will move further away from the water. So the impacts of beavers, which can be burrows which collapse if tractors go over the top of them, if you've got a field that's been worked very close to the water's edge. Most of the conflicts could be avoided if there was a decent buffer strip along rivers where, say for example, there's agriculture. And that is really a key statistic. So a lot of the things we talk about in the Scottish Beaver Action Group, which talks about kind of national issues in relation to beavers, is we're kind of being reactive about mitigating the impacts that beavers might have. But the easiest thing to do, although it is the most difficult thing to do, would actually be proactive and start making sure that we have buffer strips along all of our rivers in areas of, say, high use agricultural land, arable agricultural land, and you would just avoid basically most of the impacts that beavers have. But that's obviously very, very difficult to go and deliver. So at the moment we're still being quite reactive in terms of the mitigation that we're doing, but we're certainly looking into buffer strips and how we can go and deliver them within the National Park Authority. It's also a facultative herbivore, so it's got two pairs of big incisor teeth. It's got a diastema just like a sheep does, so it's got a big gap between its front incisors and its molars. So big flat molars for grinding up the grass or whatever vegetation it's eating. The reason that people think it eats fish is one of these sticky lies. So it's a complete untruth, but everybody knows one thing about beavers. It's like they eat fish. All to do with C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia, because Mr. and Mrs. Beaver sat down to a meal of fish. That's where it comes from, and it's just super sticky. It's a really difficult one to get rid of. But they are facultative herbivores. They might occasionally, if they come across a dead fish or something, they might nibble on it. Just like red deer on rum will go and guzzle on a Manx shearwater if they manage to get to it. But they primarily, a huge amount, most of their diet is all to do with eating plants, and they've been recorded eating more than 400 different species of plants, and that includes trees as well. And individual beavers are just like individual people, and they like certain things. They'll be fussy, and they think at this time of year this is what I eat, and then a beaver at the same time of year somewhere else might eat something completely different. So they've all got their own personal preferences, and beavers can be very, very individual. It's a cortivore, not a lignivore, so that's just a fancy way of saying they eat bark, they don't eat wood. They can't digest wood, they're not fungus, so lignin's no good for them, but they can eat the growing layer of a tree, which is the bark, and that's what keeps them going over the winter time. And they're built for comfort, not for speed. So flat out, 4.5 miles an hour, swimming or on land, so they don't move anywhere fast because they're bulk feeders. And that's one of the reasons why they stay so close to water. They just don't feel safe being far away from water. And they just need a lot of space for their digestive system. So just like rabbits and hares, they will sometimes re-ingest their feces. So they'll have like soft green pellets they'll produce, and they'll just re-ingest that because they can only extract about 30% of the energy from the material that they ingest. So what do beavers do? Well, beavers, they burrow, they fell, and they build. This is an example of a beaver lodge. This is from Loch and Moor, or the Lily Loch at Rothiemurchus Estate. This was the first place we reintroduced beavers on just about noon on the 18th of December 2023. Now, 6 weeks after we released the beavers, I was out there with the Director of Nature and Climate Change, so my boss's boss's boss. So second in command in the park, and we were walking around the edge of the Lochan to go and find out where the beavers were, and we'd gone pretty much all the way around, and there was no sign of a lodge and there was no sign of a burrow, and it's like, oh, this isn't good. And we're getting almost back to where we started, and underneath this juniper bush, which was completely intact 2.75 years ago, Andy Ford, my director, came across and said, "Is this the burrow? Is this the lodge?" And he was like, "Yes." And the lodge was hidden completely by the juniper bush. And now the lodge is not hidden completely by the juniper bush, and quite a lot of the juniper bush has disappeared. And it keeps getting bigger. So it's over 6 meters long, it's over 5 meters wide, and if you're standing there, it's 2 meters high. And the central chamber for the beavers is just in here. And this is just what they've created. and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And this is their food cache. This is their winter food cache. So what they'll do usually is when you get to the autumn equinox, so when the days are sort of like 12 hours dark, 12 hours light, all of a sudden it's like light bulb for the beavers going, we need to go and make a food cache. So they start taking down lots of woody materials, so the felling of trees accelerates, and then what they do is they snip off lots of branches and twigs, and they go and make a big sort of mattress, double mattress sized pile of twigs and branches just in front of the lodge. And the beavers have got an entrance here and an entrance here, so they can just swim out underwater and go and grab some twigs, go back into the lower chamber, which is in here, and this is where they do their feeding and grooming, and they don't actually need to break out through the ice at all if this is completely frozen over. And so when we first released the beavers, we reckon this was the only place of shelter, the only sort of, there was only bush really round about the edge, and we reckon that's the first place of shelter that they found. They liked it, so they just decided, let's go and build a lodge here. And they're also dealing with ice for the first time, and they came from Tayside, because a lot of the beavers, well, pretty much all the beavers that we get are beavers that landowners don't want, and exclusively from Tayside. So they've probably been living in a farmer's field, and then they were kind of put into somewhere where there was probably almost like 10 centimetres of ice that winter because it was particularly cold. And they were quite happy dealing with the ice. And we were feeding the beavers a little bit round the corner from here. And so we feed them for 2 weeks we feed them for 2 weeks every day after release to get them to come to the trail cameras we've got to make sure they're still there, they're behaving normally, they're uninjured. And then after that, because beavers like being fed 3 days a week, which is Monday, Wednesday and Friday, maybe because I didn't want to work weekends all the time, we feed them for 4 weeks after that. So we do 6 weeks of feeding, and then we get lots of camera trap footage, we study that, we make sure that everything's okay, and then after 6 weeks we basically stop feeding them and say, right, we've signed this off. And the beavers are established there, and they seem quite happy. And there was a lovely video of, I think it was the female beaver, tidying the plates of ice to the edge, and just with her teeth, just moving them all out of the way to come out to go and feed on the carrot pile. And that again is just instinctive behaviour. And beavers have just a massive number of behaviours that they can utilise depending on the situation that they're in. And it's all just hardwired into their brains, from millions of years of evolution. And both the North American beavers and the Eurasian beavers do pretty much exactly the same things. Before the Scottish Beaver Trial took place, it was said that the Eurasian beavers didn't build lodges such as this as much. And they reckon the reason for that might have been was because of the extensive exploitation of those beavers. That if you built a lodge, you were kind of advertising the fact that you were there. So there's quite a heavy selection pressure not to advertise yourself, because you only got to advertise yourself once and then that was it. So they reckon that the Eurasian beavers tended to burrow more simply because of the hunting pressure. And once that hunting pressure was taken away, we've got lodges, we've got burrows. It just really depends on the circumstance and what the topography is like, depending on what beavers do. And some beavers have built a burrow and then they built a lodge. So it's not like a tree nesting golden eagle, that if you're born in a tree nest, then as a golden eagle you tend to build tree nests. With beavers, they can kind of do whatever they need to do. So they burrow. Now, effectively, what a lodge is just it's an above ground burrow. So it's got 2 chambers. So burrows will have 2 chambers as well. So a lower chamber at water level, where they do all the grooming, where they do all of their eating, and then they'll have an inclined tunnel that will go up to an upper chamber, and that's where they do the sleeping. So they don't eat in bed, so there's no crumbs in the bed, nothing like that. So it's all down low. So like every good house, it should always have a hall. Also, like, a porch with a hallway, and then you can go up to the bedroom, and it's nice and clean and relatively dry, although it's probably a little bit damp. So they're basically creating an above ground burrow, and it's not bear proof, this. So nothing is bear proof. A determined bear will rip apart any structure, even when it's frozen solid. But what it does is it gives beavers time to get out, because it takes quite a while for a bear to go and rip in. So as soon as the bear starts ripping away at it, then the beavers know, right, okay, get out. So they disappear quite quickly. So it just gives them time to escape. It's also warm as well, because it's got a great amount of thermal insulation as well, which is really important, obviously during the winter time. They fell trees. So they'll fell a lot of sticks here. So most of the sticks here, almost all of them have still got their bark on them. So they don't tend to use the sticks that they bark stripped to go and put on the lodge itself. And I think that might be to do with a bit of camouflage. But it's very, very seldom we'll actually see a bark gnawed stick or branch on top of a beaver lodge. And they can build all sorts of things. They can build lodges. What we can see here, if we drain this loch, what we would find is we'd find underwater pathways all heading out to the lodge, so all sort of like radiating out from the lodge to various different places. And when the beavers get scared, what happens is they'll dive down, they'll kind of feel their way to where that pathway is, and then they'll just go back to where the lodges are. Which is just, again, so basically an underwater trail for them to get back to the lodge. And they build dams as well, which I think we've got a picture of later. Yes, there we go. So they build dams, very contentious for fish people. So fisheries are very concerned about beaver dams. There's pretty much I don't think there's been any beaver dams that have been allowed to stay in place anywhere where there's a lot of salmon spawning that goes on. So we don't really know what the impact of them is because we've not been allowed to study it. But with the Spey Fishery Board, because we've got a very good relationship with them, we've got an agreement that if there is a dam that is constructed in a salmon spawning burn, that we will keep the dam in situ and we'll go and study to see what actually happens. Now, you would imagine, because beavers have been about for 7.5 million years, and I think Atlantic salmon have been about for not quite as long, I don't think, but they've been living together for several million years. They probably get on. So it's not too much of a stretch for an Atlantic salmon or a sea trout to go and swim over the top of that. And if there's enough water below, then of course a salmon or a trout can easily jump over the top of it. And in dry weather, what happens is maybe it was too shallow here for the adult fish to get over, but there'll be deeper pools further back if there's more beaver dams, and the fish can go and wait there until there's enough rain for them to go and get over the dam. And also the deep pools that are behind the dams are fantastic nursery habitats for the young stages of the fish, the smoke, the parr, and also the smoke stage as well, because there's lots and lots of insects in beaver ponds. Because of the accumulation of organic sediments, there's lots of food there, so the food chain's kind of really, really very, well, it's not functional, it's very functional, but it's also producing lots and lots of biomass, so there's lots and lots of things to go and eat. So what you tend to find is you get bigger juvenile stages of fish behind beaver dams and in beaver ponds than you would if it was just a straight section of river. And you'll get more young fish overall in a very gravelly channel, but they'll all be really, really small because they're all competing for food and there's not actually that much food in that particular channel. You'll also notice that lots of the willows here have been coppiced. So this is from Norway. And this is because willows and beavers coexist. So willows have been about for about 1.7 million years, beavers a lot longer. And so willows have come into being as a species and evolved as a species in the presence of beavers, and that's why they coppice. So trees that coppice tend to grow close to water, and that's their way of surviving beaver herbivory. And so the dams are leaky as well. So we tend to think, they built a dam, it's like the Hoover Dam, it's like the Glascarnoch Dam. It's not a concrete dam, it's a leaky dam. Sometimes the water goes underneath the dams, and often the water will go around the side of the dams, creating side channels and creating complexity in the water courses. So the dams that we have actually are fantastically complex microhabitats for all sorts of invertebrates. And things like beautiful demoiselle larvae love to go and live in the dams. Because there's so much food there, and of course that's another part of the food chain. And they've done studies down in Exeter, where again on the River Otter, beavers spontaneously appeared in the early 2000s, and they've done lots of studies there at Exeter University, and what they found is that water voles will persist in the presence of mink in beaver modified habitats because they're so complex. So basically there's lots of hiding places in a beaver modified wetland because it's just simply so complex. And it's that complexity that creates a huge amount of biomass, because the more complicated a habitat is, the more hiding places there are, the more niches there are, the more different places there are, different environmental conditions that just favour lots and lots of different species. And it's the reason why if you put a bath in your front garden, in front of your house, and just leave it to fill rainwater, then all of a sudden species spontaneously appear in it. And that is because they've evolved to colonise beaver ponds. So pretty much, not every wetland species, but a vast number of wetland species have evolved to go and utilise these spontaneously created wetland systems that didn't exist before. And that's why so many wetland species are really, really good at colonising. And when you don't have that, then that obviously has an impact on them. Now, hopefully, this should work. So this is over the period of one night. So this started at 8:20. So this is one of the beaver dams that we had to remove, and there are actually 2 beavers that were involved in this. There you go, that's an hour and a half. Busy as a beaver, you know. And they're all doing this in the dark. So the reason we had to remove this dam was because it was backing up field drains in a very, very low-lying area. But then what the dam does is it provides habitat for lots of other species, and we've seen a lot of other species utilising dams and investigating lodges. The nicest one is the grey heron at Loch and Moor, that likes to go and sit on the beaver lodge in the mornings when it's sunny and a bit cold. And I think because it's all dark, it's all black mud, it warms up. So there's like this sort of like warm air coming up, and the beaver and the heron just kind of hangs out. It's like, yeah. But again, these novel structures are utilised by lots and lots of different animals because they've evolved to go and do that. Look back again. Move on. So why bring beaver back? And quite a few people have sort of said, why? Well, they do help with the climate and ecological emergency, but they're just one thing. They're not something that's going to go and solve all of the problems. And you need to create the conditions, namely a substantial amount of riparian woodland that would allow beavers to go and colonise an area. But they really can help, but only when they're acting at scale. So if you've got a very short catchment that's very shallow and it's got lots of riparian woodland, then beavers will probably have quite a profound impact in that particular area. A positive impact in terms of holding water back, allowing water to infiltrate down through gravels if they exist there, creating new habitat, and creating higher low flows and reducing the peaks of the high flows. So basically making a river less flashy by creating more hydraulic roughness, but also creating lots of leaky dams all the way through it. But say for example somewhere like the Spey, because so much of the catchment is uplands that beavers will never live in, beavers will never have an impact on the flow regime of the Spey because it's just simply too vast a catchment. But on smaller scale catchments, they could have quite a profound impact. And we have to be very careful not to overpromise what beavers do, because even though we do feed them carrots, they're very independent minded. They're quite anarchic actually, so they will not take direction. So they will do whatever they want, and they will probably not do what you think that they're going to do. So the first thing I was told by a beaver expert was, never say definitively beavers are going to do this in that particular area, because they probably won't. They do benefit multiple species they've co-evolved with, because they're the only animal in Western Europe that modifies its habitat as much as humans do. And that's one of the reasons why there's conflict with them, because we're not in charge of beavers, and beavers do their own thing, and that can obviously conflict with our particular land uses. But that can be mitigated in most situations. But because they modify the habitats, because they create brand new habitats, there's just so many species that have co-evolved with it, just so many different species. And there's also a strong archaeological thinking that humans benefited from beaver modified habitats. So a professor called Brian E. Coles was working on the Sweet Track, working in what's now the Avalon Marshes just near Glastonbury in Somerset. They were excavating this 4,000-year-old wooden trackway over this marshland, and they found these sleeping platforms that humans were using, and they found this interestingly cut stick, and they couldn't figure out what sort of tool had been used to cut this particular stick. And so all the archaeologists are going, maybe it was the tooth of something, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. And then they gave it to a zoologist and they said, it's a beaver. Oh! So Bryony Coles had a bit of an epiphany and thought, right, I'm going to go and research this. And it's her contention that when early humans 400,000 years ago were colonising Western Europe, that they utilised beaver-modified habitats because that's where the game was, that's where the natural bridges were, the dams over the wetlands. There was lots of available wood and wood chips to go and make fires. And also because of the coppicing, the woodland was relatively open, so it was actually quite easy to go and travel through. It wasn't the denser wildwood that you would have had further away from the river systems themselves. So it's arguably that we've co-evolved with beavers as well. And there's also some things that have definitely beavers have inspired us to create. So here's some questions for you. So what structures have we been inspired to create and perfect, but originally it would have been beavers were the inspiration? So can anybody think of structures? There's a couple of obvious ones. Dams, so Mesopotamia around about 3,000 years ago. Also associated with the dams, there's something else, and there's one of them that goes between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and one that goes between Inverness and Fort William. Canals, so they will dig channels to go and access wood, to go and move bigger bits of wood. So humans, again, they would have seen this in Mesopotamia around about the same time, about 3,000 years ago. Something that's not unique to Scotland, but the word is unique to Scotland, and there was one of them in Loch Tay, which the centre of which burnt down. Crannogs, so they can build artificial islands to go and build their beaver lodges on. Think back to a construction technique that might be similar to how you would build a lodge. Wattle and daub, yeah. And I'm sure there's, and coppicing's the obvious one as well. So we saw them coppice, we thought we can do this a bit better. So beavers have certainly inspired humans to go and do and make things that we just consider are ours, but they would have originally been inspired by beavers. If we can get beavers to act at scale in a catchment, then they can have a really, really big positive impact. But it's all the thing about acting at scale. You know, one family of beavers is not going to have a big impact, but if you've got hundreds of beavers, then that is going to start to have an impact. And bizarrely, although some people will struggle with this one, they're actually a keystone species for riparian woodland. And people say, but they're going to go and eat all the trees. That's true. But as long as the grazing pressure isn't too high, then the trees will coppice in return. And what I like to say is beavers ask difficult questions. So you might have a nice strip of riparian woodland, and it looks fine, but there's absolutely no natural regeneration. And it'll be fine for maybe 100 years, and then the trees die, and then there's no more trees. But the beavers come in, start taking the trees down, and there's no natural regeneration. All of a sudden, the beavers make really obvious a situation that we might have lived with in our lifetime and not really considered. And also, a lot of the riparian woodland we have tends to be a strip of trees that's usually about 1 tree thick. And so that's not really a functional riparian woodland. So it's challenging our preconceptions of habitats, but because of the dynamism that they bring, it really forces us to go and deal with some of the issues that are not really to do with the beavers, but the beavers highlight them. And we've talked about creating incredibly complex habitats. So this is a place called Mill Dam, just near Dunkeld. What the picture doesn't show you is they're a whacking great Victorian dam with a bust sluice down there. So when the sluice broke, this area of wetland dried out, and the beavers moved in and they built a low dam about 2 feet, about 60 centimetres high, for about maybe 100 and 200 metres. The beaver lodge is there, and so the beavers have flooded back this area. The trees died because it re-wetted, and you've got lots of beaver channels through here. And you've also just got lots of different colours and lots of different patterns, and that's just a huge amount of environmental complexity that just humans could not create. We could not create that. With all the money in the world, you couldn't do that. And beavers kind of effectively do it for nothing. This is another, this is our mega lodge. So this is the biggest lodge that we've got. It's probably about 10 metres long by now, probably about 7 metres wide and over 2 metres high. So these beavers got flooded out of the 2 burrows they dug initially when we released them, and then they kind of disappeared for about 2 months. It's like, oh my goodness, where have they gone? And then I was looking through my binoculars and was like, oh, is that a lodge? And I managed to walk to it and christened it the Mega Lodge because it was just huge. And this is a bit of a flyover that we've done with the drone. So we fly over the Mega Lodge, and we notice a lot of wetland here, and we suspected there was a dam, and just as we go over the trees, the dam's going to come into view, so this structure here. So it's about 70 metres long and about 60, 70 metres high. Predominantly made out of mud, just shovelled up, just bulldozed up. And the beavers would go out here and then go to feed in the water lilies. They love the rhizomes of water lilies and also common reed. That particular dam, because the beavers built, well, other beavers built another dam on the outflow of the bigger loch, because the water's been there, the dam's just all kind of floated away and kind of it's just kind of dispersed. It doesn't really exist as a dam anymore. But that's because that dam there has been superseded by one on quite a small outflow that's only about 6 metres wide. The reason the beavers built the dam then was because it was last April, which was I think our driest spring ever. The water levels were getting too low, and the underwater entrance, which is crucial to all of the burrows and all of the lodges, was getting too close to the surface of the water. So the beavers had to do something about it, so they started building the dam. So what they do is they dam the outflow, the water starts going around the edges of the dam, so you just build the dam longer and longer and longer and longer. Not necessarily higher, but just longer. And we reckon it was backing up about 40,000 cubic metres of water at its peak. And the difference between the water level of this water body and the water body in the smaller loch that the mega lodge was on, we reckon it was about 1 metre at peak. With the new dam that's been built, the water level here has gone up, and I've calculated that it's 5.6 million bathtubs full of water have been held back by a dam that's about 6 metres wide and about 1 metre high. Absolutely incredible. So the licence application, so we're going backwards in time. This is August 2023. Because it's a European protected species, we need to get a licence for it from the Scottish Government or from Nature Scot. So we needed to gather the views of local people, communities and stakeholders to provide testimony of their opinions for the project and for a licence application. Now, what we said is all we're doing is collecting opinions. We are not going to edit any of these opinions. It is up to us to say if we can mitigate any of the concerns that people have, and if we can't mitigate those concerns, that will be something for Nature Scot to make a decision on. And we had a 6-week consultation, so 14th of August to 25th of September, 42 days of formal engagements, 115 online survey respondents, which is actually quite good even for a national survey, so I've been told. Nearly 400 comments received, 104 attendees at events, lots of people reached on social media, and 18 site visits with landowners and managers. Now, those 18 site visits with landowners and managers have probably ballooned to more than 100 now. Some landowners we've been visiting on an almost weekly basis, but now that's gone down to monthly. But the dialogue that we've been having with farmers and crofters has continued, and the relationship has actually improved greatly over time. So what happened during the consultation is about halfway through, probably about the beginning of September, all of a sudden some farmers thought, oh my goodness, the Park Authority is going to go ahead with this. And so got very, very exercised on social media, so much so that just before Christmas that year, you might have seen there was a tractor demonstration that took place in Granton-on-Spey, inspired by some of the tractor demonstrations in Germany. But what the media didn't report, as they reported the tractor demonstration, the media didn't report is all those people in the tractors parked up and then came to the Park Authority offices to go and attend a meeting that they had asked the Park Authority to organise. But that really wasn't news, so obviously the tractor demonstration was. But because of that, the crofters and farmers created the Cairngorms Crofters and Farmers Association, and now we have a single point of contact that really represents probably about 90% or more of the farmers and crofters within Strathspey, and actually it's in the wider park itself. So it makes our job a lot easier, and we can disseminate information, really well between farmers and crofters. Oops. We also had to produce a report on the protected species and habitats that could be impacted. So we've talked a bit about Atlantic salmon, freshwater pearl mussels. So freshwater pearl mussels have been about for about 15 million years, so before beavers. And they're still here, although with much smaller numbers, but that's to do with humans. So we don't think they're going to be impacted on, but obviously we need to do research about that. So when we start to get dams being put in place, where we do have some freshwater pearl mussels, then again we're going to go and research that. But interestingly, where the freshwater pearl mussels are in the River Spey, which has got the greatest number of freshwater pearl mussels in the whole of the UK, and it's probably about 50% of the world population in Scotland. The other 50% is in Russia, and some very, very small numbers in continental Europe. They're not in the tributaries, so the tributaries are where the beavers are going to go and modify the habitats, and we're hoping that there's actually going to be a translocation project for freshwater pearl mussels, and some of the places that we'll be thinking of translocating them into is potentially beaver modified habitats when they take place. The reason the freshwater pearl mussels aren't in the tributaries is because they were the easiest ones to go and fish, and the freshwater pearl mussels that survived in the main stem of the river did so because it was just too difficult to get into, and that's how they managed to survive. Aspen is also another one, so we've got a lot of dialogue with farmers and crofters. We've had quite a lot of dialogue and ongoing dialogue with particularly people who are very involved in lichen conservation. So they're very concerned about the loss of aspen trees close to water, and they're also very concerned about the loss of veteran trees. So through dialogue with them, we've come up with a protocol for protecting a certain number of trees in areas to make sure there's a continuity of age classes of young trees, middle-aged trees and old trees, to allow lichens to go and colonise and persist in an area. But what we're not looking to do is fencing off large areas and excluding beavers from large areas of woodland. We're very fortunate to have the greatest amount of aspen and old aspen really anywhere in Scotland, in River Spey, so we're particularly important, and we've commissioned fungi surveys, moss or bryophyte surveys, and also lichen surveys of some of the key aspen woodlands that we have, and I'm very excited to go and read those reports. That's 55 minutes. Stop. Don't mind, not long to go, only another hour. So again, it's a, maybe the lichen experts might not agree with this, but what the beavers have done have kind of shone an extra light upon the aspen, and there's a lot of really positive things that are coming out from it. So again, the beavers have kind of posed the questions, and we've had to come up with some of the solutions, and I think in the long term it's going to be really, really positive. And also we're finding we're kind of a bit like because we've got resource, so there's me, I've got a project officer, and we've got 1 day a week project assistant. We've got more resource than anybody else in Scotland to go and kind of deal with beavers and to work with different groups. And what we're hoping to do is to demonstrate best practice, which will allow other groups who are involved in releasing beavers in other areas to make it easier for them, because we've gone through the kind of the painful bit of figuring out what to do, and we'll have a method of working that hopefully will be transferable all over Scotland. And particularly for the lichens, as you go further west, so the Nest catchment, and then going further west than that, obviously we get more and more lichen species, more rare lichen species, the further west we go. So again, developing this protocol hopefully could develop a national protocol and a way of working. This is just an example of a dam. So we've got the dam there, and this is the side channel. So dams will always have side channels, and if the water level is maintained, the beavers will be quite happy to go and have a side channel like this. There's an area of burn restoration just near, just the upper part of the Dublin catchment, just near the Slough, called Alt-Lorgie, and they put in kind of like artificial dams, and one of the things that happened is there was a side channel created like this going through grass, and Duncan Ferguson, who's now the director of the Spey Fishery Board, he was overjoyed to find lots of young trout hiding in the grass. The water was going over the top of, simply because it was a novel sheltered habitat in what was a very open, gravelly single channel river before the interventions had taken place of the burn restoration. And these are the sorts of things that beavers can do at scale. They don't need planning permission. It doesn't cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. You don't need to use any diesel and machines to go and do it. And again, it's just something that we need to, wherever possible, allow to happen, because there's multiple benefits for biodiversity. Just some statistics. This was our first release on Loch Morlech. We've had 2 beaver releases there. That took place in year 2. So in year 1 we had 6 releases of 18 beavers. In year 2 we had 15 individual beavers over 4 releases, and then this year, and a beaver year runs from September to March. Those are the release period, and then between April to August is the kit dependency period, so you're not allowed, without a special licence, you're not allowed to trap or translocate beavers during that time, because the females obviously could be suckling young. In the first year, we had breeding from 2 families. We had 2 kits. In 2025, last year, we had 18 from 8 families, so we had more than 2 kits per family, so we had 3 families that had 3 kits each, which is really, really good. And with the releases we've had this year, we're up to 60 beavers. So 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had 0 beavers in the Upper Spey catchment. And now we've actually got 59 because one went down to Fochabers. Well, one was down actually Garmouth. And then the viaduct collapsed, as you may be aware of. But the beaver had nothing to do with that viaduct whatsoever. This is a little bit of video. We're just the last couple of slides. How many kits can you count? How many can you see?
2 or 3.
Yeah. So 1, 2, 3. And so this female, she was breeding in her. No, they didn't breed. She was 2 when she was released. So this was in her 3rd year. So this was her first breeding, and she produced 3 kits. And usually it's 1 to 4 is pretty much 4 is the maximum for your Asian beavers. So we were just like overjoyed to go and see that. And it just shows that beavers are in fantastic habitat, they're in really good condition, and they're producing young, which will disperse when they get to about 2. And where's the best place to watch beavers? Well, we direct people to the Beaver Trail at Rothiemurchus. So in partnership with Rothiemurchus Estate, we created the Beaver Trail, which starts and ends at a cafe with toilets, which is great. And if you go there, so the infrastructure was there, we just put the signage in. And if you go there about an hour before dark, before the vegetation gets too big, you've got a good opportunity of going to see beavers. There's also another kind of, not a beaver trail that's happened, but an inflow to Loch Morlich. If you're familiar with Glenmore at all, and you know where the Hayfield car park is, there's the yellow trail that comes down from the Hayfield car park. And if you walk down the yellow trail alongside the Avon Rua Unicorn, you will see lots and lots and lots of beaver sign. So in the last 30 years, lots of willows have grown up there because of the reduction in grazing pressure, and the beavers have been having a good go at them. So there's lots and lots of really obvious beaver signs right beside a path, and lots of people have been really enjoying that. And it's great that people can, we've got a path there, and people can just, see the beaver activity, right there. This is our boat of Garton beaver. So this is an individual, so it's a bit of scent marking here. We do a bit of a tail wag on that side. But yeah, lots of other, badgers, otter. So this is the beaver entrance, it's partially collapsed. This is the upper chamber. Brown hair, and I think we've got a pine marten, I think we've got a wildcat coming, I think. Deer. Oh yeah, woodcock. Yeah. Oh, there you go. There's the wildcat. Yeah. So we've had at least 2 wildcats on cameras, and again, it's a novel smell for a lot of animals. It's like, ooh, what's this? And so what's happening now is we're getting beavers dispersing. So we've got 2 individuals that we think are just single individuals that have created territories for themselves. So one at Boat of Garden, one at Granton, just in the River Spey. And as the kits get older, when they get to 2 years, they disperse themselves. They don't get kicked out by their parents, and sometimes they'll come back to the families if they can't find a partner, can't find a mate rather, and then they'll go and disperse again in the next summer. But it's just fascinating with the trail cams, just all the different things that we've managed to catch on camera. We'll go play that game. And so what the beaver's doing there is it's depositing its castoreum. And so the castoreum is basically fermented urine. But it's got lots and lots of volatile chemicals in it. It's got more than 100 volatile chemicals. And the combinations of these chemicals tell beavers a huge amount. It's like a barcode. So it tells us things that we will never be able to kind of quite understand. But those chemicals will disperse in water, so beavers will be able to smell and taste the water, know there's a beaver, say, upstream. Through the scent marking, they'll be able to figure out, what sort of condition the beaver's in. Am I related to that beaver? Potentially, is that beaver in season or not? But they live in a world of smell. They've got very poor eyesight, and it's hearing and smell, but smell is their really, really big thing. And so this is Pete, this is my colleague, so Pete, the Beaver Project Officer. So what does the Cairngorms Beaver Project do? Well, what doesn't it do? It's a very wide remit. A lot of public engagement still, a lot of site monitoring, stakeholder engagement event and organising events, delivering beaver mitigation, which at the moment has mainly been tree wrapping using weld mesh. So 0.9mm weld mesh, the beavers can't bite through, and if you make a cylinder round about trees and you pin it down into the ground, then the beavers shouldn't be able to get through that. We feed the beavers during releases. We do kit watches in the winter and summertime with lots of volunteers, over 50 volunteers last year, and to get an idea of how many kits have been produced. Hand out beaver sticks, unfortunately not today because I didn't have a stash with me. Lots of office work, and basically anything to do with beavers and sometimes not to do with beavers we get involved with. And this is Pete looking very unflustered. And this is me looking a complete mess, and this is because I've been working like a navvy for about 4 hours before the beaver release. So this was on the 18th of December 2023, and we just felled some trees and we built the brash piles and we got the carrots out, and this is us just putting up the last of the camera traps. So yeah, it's a lot easier when you have more people to help. Many hands make light work. And finally, this is a good example of what happens with willow. Is you get these new growth coming from the willow cuts, and if you're ever wondering, is it a beaver nod branch or twig, all you have to do is you can see the ridges there. All you have to do is just run your finger, and you can do it with this beaver stick. It's particularly fine Latvian beaver stick. You'll always feel the teeth marks and the ridges, so it's not a break. You'll definitely feel the ridges, which are the individual teeth marks. And one of the really unusual things that we found, and I'm not sure, I've not read it, it might be documented, but with willow species, what we're finding is that beavers will, their favourite tree species is willow. So your default species, if you're doing a beaver survey, is look for willow that's trailing in the water. And if there's a beaver there, usually they will take a nip out of it, because that's the low-hanging fruit, literally, and they love willows. They also love rowan as well, and those tend to be the two favourite species. Aspen, not so much, which is interesting. So in other parts of the world, aspen seems to be the real favourite one for beavers, but not so much. And I think it's possibly because we've got so much high quality riparian woodland with lots of willow, and that's what they like to go for. But they cut chunks of willow, maybe sometimes this size. They won't take all the bark off it. That falls into the water, floats down the water, it sends out bright red rootlets, and basically you've got a big piece of vegetative material that will get washed up and will establish another willow. And so this is an example of the co-evolution. So the beavers are actually agents of spreading willow vegetatively, as well as eating the willow. So what we're hoping to find is we're going to find a lot more willow further downstream from Granton, where it's really alder dominated. And there'll just be this rain of vegetative material that's going to be going down the River Spey, which is going to allow the establishment of more and more woodland, as long as the grazing pressure isn't too high. Yeah, you're never bored in the world of beavers, because there's always something new to learn. But it's just like nature in general, there's always something new to learn. And if you want more information, go to the cairngorms.co.uk website /beaver. We produce monthly updates. We've been producing them since January last year. And so every month we give an update of what the beavers are up to, what we've managed to, where the territories are, if they've spread. We try and be as open as we possibly can about where the beavers are, so we don't want to be secretive about anything. So we're not accused of not talking about the beavers or hiding them. So as long as we've got landowners' permission, we're very kind of out there about where the beavers are. And again, they're very robust. So if people disturb them, they will just leave. They will just, if they disturb them constantly at a burrow, they'll just disappear. They'll just move somewhere else. But amazingly, and I'm really proud of this, we've not had any problems with people disturbing beavers. So they are pretty robust. They tend to be out when people are not about. So you can actually advertise where they are, which is very different from things like capercaillie and wildcats. And also, because they're quite watchable, you can get hopefully kind of good views of them as well, which is really nice, because a lot of wildlife, you know, you're kind of these days you're not being encouraged to go and look for, but with beavers, because they're pretty robust, you can do so, which is great. So thanks very much.
Is there any questions? Anybody?
Ian.
Two quick questions about trees. Alder, not a tree they like. I mean, bark might be very acid, or how do they react with alder?
So there is, if you Google palatability table in Forestry and Forestry Commission, you'll find a palatability table of 1 to 7, and on number 7, which is the least palatable of all for herbivores, you've got rhododendron, Sitka spruce, and alder. So alder's full of tannins, which is one of the reasons I think why it lasts so well in water. So beavers can eat it, but maybe it's a bit like you eating liver or something incredibly distasteful. You can eat it, but you don't like it. And so it's kind of a tree of last resort.
But it is a feature of riparian woodland, because it's riparian, well, largely riparian, presumably alder.
Well, this is another, well, apart from slope alderwoods, yeah, but this is another epiphany. Is like, particularly in River Spey, there's a lot of alder, and a lot of riparian trees tend to be alder. And what will happen if you get the grazing pressure down to a certain level, you'll get alder regeneration. But to get willow rowan regeneration, you need to get the herbivore levels right down. And I think the reason that we've got so much alder in our riparian landscape is because it's the one that can kind of get away from a reasonably high grazing pressure, but not too high. And I think also in River Spey, I think they actually planted it as well. So reflecting back on my early career in Strathglass, it's predominantly the riparian woodlands all alder, and I think it's the only tree that can persist with a high grazing pressure.
Just one quickie, willow, that looked like grey willow, but which particular species is the commonest one that, goat?
Willow. So basically, they're not fussed about it. They've not gone for big goat willows, but yeah, any willow that's growing by a watercourse, they're really just, they don't seem to be fussy at all about it, but willow and rowan tend to be the two favourite species.
Do they eat the leaves?
Yes. So they eat the bark in the winter time because that's still green, so they've still got some nutrient in there. But when they fell a tree, they basically start at the top, and so they'll nibble all the leaves, all the little twigs, and then when they get to something that's maybe about the size of your pinky, then they start to do the bark stripping. So when it's a really small twig, they'll just eat it all, because it's more bark than wood. But then when it gets to a certain diameter, there's too much wood for them, so they'll just start to go and strip the bark. And they tend to favour between 2 to 5 centimetres in diameter is the absolute perfect. So basically, a coppice that's probably about 2 or 3 years old is absolutely the perfect size for beavers. So they kind of do their gardening and create their beaver coppice to go and feed on.
Do they like hazel?
Well, I can't say, well, ours don't, so they've not felled an awful lot of hazel, so they felled about 2 wands of hazel. They've nibbled a couple of coppice stools, but they've not really gone for hazel big time. And we do have a fair amount of hazel, so it just seems to be, but I think because we've got so much willow and rowan and birch, they're quite happy to go for that. But I think in time they probably would.
So, are they likely to be addicted to salicylates?
I don't think they're addicted to it, but that is something that I didn't say.
Pain relief.
So one of the things that castoreum was used as a medicine before it was used in the perfume industry, and it was used, don't take this the wrong way, for women's problems. So that was what castoreum was used to treat in the old herbal days. But there is, because they eat a lot of willow, they do consume the salicylic acid, so the castoreum actually has aspirin in it, and that's why it was used as a medicine. So it was effective as a medicine because of all the willow that was consumed.
In a previous life, I came across a young lad, an 8-year-old, who was addicted to salicylates by eating too many apples.
Right.
Seriously, and I was a nutrition therapist at one point, and I worked this out through a dietary plan, and he was going through 8 or 10 apples a day, and all sorts of issues. And it turned out it was in the apple skin. So I got his mum to peel his apples and give him the pears instead, and he was sorted.
But maybe that's a bit of co-evolution going on there. Maybe it's the effect of like the aphid and the honeydew. Maybe they do get this kind of taste for the salicylates, and then it's like, oh, that's why I really like willow.
Exactly. And were you ever tempted to eat the carrots yourself?
Well,
Not the willow.
not the willow. So initially we started off with pony carrots from Harborough, which are, it's like, what is it? Was it £7 for 8 kilos? It's quite expensive.
They're just carrots.
I know, they're not great carrots. So we actually, I had a contact and we actually got organic carrots. So we got, nothing's too good for us.
This secret's out.
So basically it was the rejects, the Brock carrots from a big carrot farm, but they were all dirty. So all those pony carrots are washed, which means they don't last very long. If you don't wash a carrot, it lasts for ages. So our beavers have been on. So the first release of beavers at the Lily Loch, they've been feeding on pony carrots. So they're nice and clean. Oh, this is great. And then we put the dirty carrots down, the organic carrots, and it's like, and so the beaver, I got a video, kind of picked it up and went, oh! And then it's like, it's dirty. And so immediately went down to the water, washed it, and then ate it. So again, they just get used to things. But again, there's a funny story about. So there was a family of beavers that were caught that lived in a carrot field in Tayside, and when they get taken into captivity, so before they get translocated, if there's a family there, they try and catch the whole family. They put them into captivity, and they do health tests on them, so full blood tests, make sure they've got no diseases. If they've got any kind of diseases they can treat, they'll go and treat them. If they've got cryptosporidium, unfortunately you have to get euthanized because you can't treat that. And so they're in really good health, they're in tip-top health basically when they get released back into the environment. And one of the things that we kind of kept back is that, are they going to be beaver fever, giardia? Is this going to be spread by beavers? And the beavers that are released out are actually completely clean. They're not infected with anything. And what happens is they'll get infected by whatever's in the environment. And another thing that I learned about, the environment here is we do have giardia. So I thought in Scotland we don't have it. It's in North America. But the thing is, when people get diarrhea and vomiting, they tend not to go to hospital to go and get tested. So there is giardia there, but because people don't get tested, we don't really know about it. That was another new thing that I learned. It's been years of learning lots and lots and lots of new things. But so beavers don't actually seem to get infected by giardia. So I think they sampled over 100 beavers in Scotland, and none of them seem to have giardia. So they have a great tolerance to that particular parasite.
When we were in Canada, they talked about these beaver meadows.
Yes, yes.
Which beavers, there's this impenetrable woodland, beavers create the dam, floods, the trees die, and then suddenly and then the meadows come. Is that, I presume not, I can't remember the story. Is that because the beavers is no longer good for the beavers, they moved on? Because it made me think about when you were talking about humans, that's maybe they would move into the meadow bit and then big bit of woodland, and now they can, would that happen here, do you think?
Yeah, so
move on.
What's happening is, so beavers, they'll have a territory, and they'll utilise about 20%, they'll feed in about 20% of that territory in any 1 year. So it's basically kind of almost like a 5-year rotation. But it's not like they're doing one field this year, one field that year. It's really sporadic and it's completely, it's chaotic. Because they're working in the dark, they don't remember things. So they're kind of feeding them roughly 20% of the available food in any 1 year. So they've got 5 years worth of food. So what that does is, and the reason they do that is they've evolved that you need to let parts of your territory rest to let it regrow. So that's why they've got more territory than they need for 1 year. And so they will sometimes utilise different areas at different times. And sometimes they'll just, for no reason, a territory which looks fine will be abandoned. And no one quite knows why. But what's happening with the beaver meadows is, if you think about it, a dam is just like a big strainer. And what it's doing is it's slowing water down, so any particulates settle below the dam. And so the dam that we've got, the outflow of this loch, is starting to fill up with lots of organic particulate matter. So what's going to happen over time is that's just going to build up and build up and build up, and then eventually it will start to become kind of a swamp, and then it will start to dry out, and then there'll be another channel which will be on the other side of the beaver dam. So what happens with the beaver meadow is basically just all the sediments fill up. It turns into kind of like marsh fed and then dry land, but it's all of the nutrients are there, so it's incredibly nutrient rich. So you get all of the herbivores come there to go start grazing on it, and that encourages the grasses to go and grow because of all the nutrients that are there. So that's the kind of process. So we've got problems with losing lots of organic material in our river systems, particularly our burns. Because of the increased amount of rainfall that we get, all of the organic material is getting blasted out because of the flash floods that we're going through. So anything that can slow down the loss of that organic material will mean you've got a greater amount of food for the food chain, so you get a greater biomass of insects growing there. So again, that was something I learned 2 years ago at a dragonfly conference. So that's really, really important to kind of just basically hold back as much organic material as possible. So it's not just about holding the water back, but it's holding back that organic material. So yeah, but again, that takes, we're looking at, this is over decades and decades, so it's going to take a long time for those to start to form.
Has phosphorus been looked at in that context, those soils? I mean, the sorts of places they're living won't be places that are high phosphate levels due to sewage and things like that, presumably. But I wonder whether those soils are retaining phosphorus or phosphate.
Yeah, so again, down in the River Otter, so one of the tributaries called the Budley Brook has been intensively studied. There is lots of ploughing, a huge amount of soil runoff. Think of really thick, light brown hot chocolate. That is what the water looks like before it goes into the Beaver Dam complex. And when it comes out of it, it looks like very weak, cloudy hot chocolate. So it's strained out a massive amount of material. So it's strained out a lot of NPK, so all of the fertilisers. I've never seen hemlock water dropwort so green. It's like it's getting so eutrophicated or eutrophied, whatever it is. But so many nutrients in that water. So the beavers have the beaver dam complex has strained out lots of particulate matter and lots of NPK, but they can only do so much. And it's because the water's in such a poor state. So it's a lot better, but it doesn't look that good, but it's a lot better than what it came in. So if you're managing your upland, if you're managing your fields with buffer strips that are straining out a lot of that material before it went into the water, then going through the beaver dam complex, beaver modified habitat, at the end of it you have very clean water. So, but it's just basically the system's being overwhelmed because there's just so much material that's coming through. But of course those dams are straining out all of that material, so they're holding a huge amount of topsoil back in the dam complexes.
And it doesn't harm the beavers that they're dumping out all that nasty water?
They seem relatively tolerant of so-so water conditions. I think they don't. Well, they do drink the water. It's not. I don't think it's great for them. And there was a private eye cartoon that was sent to me that was like, most of the beavers were saying, it's really terrible that we can't be released, but the water's too dirty. And unfortunately, in quite a lot of places, water quality has deteriorated, and it's not been a consideration, I think, so far where beavers have been released, but it could be potentially a consideration in the future in some areas. Yeah.
You get a concentration too, wouldn't you? In and around the dam.
Yeah, so again you get a concentration of the nutrients, which again with the beaver meadows, but because there's a superabundance of all these fertilisers, you will get that. But then it's straining it out for the rest of the catchment.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank Jonathan for a very entertaining talk. And I've learned a lot, all about beavers, about C.S. Lewis and all sorts of things. So that was really good, and I want to thank you for going all this way, and thank you.